Hola. No, tranquilo. Sí. Bien, está.
Greetings from it.
Perdón, está la cámara ahí.
Muy buenos días con todos. Es un honor para nosotros tenerles el día de hoy aquí, en el marco de esta nueva agenda urbana que se está tratando en el Ecuador, en el marco de Hábitat 3. El día de hoy nos reunimos para tratar un tema que para nosotros es de vital importancia, como es la relación entre la oferta y la especialización en el uso de servicios modernos de energía en el sector residencial. Es una temática que tiene una relación directa con todo lo que se maneja dentro de Hábitat. Para el día de hoy, para la exposición del día de hoy, tenemos el honor de contar con la presencia de Augusto Spin, ministro coordinador de sectores estratégicos, Mike Enskat, él es de la agencia de cooperación alemana GIZ, con sede en Berlín, y Vanessa Castel-Broto, investigadora de asuntos de energía y hábitat en la Universidad de UCL en Londres. Contamos también con la presencia en video, porque él está en India, de Kirk Smith, investigador de la Universidad de Berkeley, quien nos va a presentar un video de lo que él ha venido estudiando y tiene mucha relación con todo el contexto que vamos a tratar el día de hoy. Esperamos que la charla sea de mucho interés y despierten ustedes también esa necesidad de buscar fuentes energéticas amigables con el ambiente y utilizarlas de una manera correcta dentro de lo que es el sector residencial en el ambiente urbano. Vamos a proceder con unas palabras de bienvenida del señor ministro Augusto Spin para comenzar.
Buenos días con todos, doctora Vanessa Castel-Broto, señor Mike Enskat, señor Martín Cordobés, delegados de Hábitat 3, miembros de la comunidad internacional, de la comunidad que nos visitan de otros países, ciudadanos ecuatorianos. Señoras y señores, la antropóloga norteamericana Margaret Mead aseguraba que no tenemos una sociedad si destruimos el medio ambiente. ¿Cuánta razón tienen esas palabras? Pues expresan claramente el espíritu de nuestro país hoy día. En la ruta hacia el desarrollo no hemos descuidado ni un solo momento el cuidado del medio ambiente. Creemos que el medio ambiente es una base fundamental de nuestra sociedad. En política las palabras solamente sirven si se ven respaldadas por hechos. En Ecuador desde hace 10 años creo que las obras hablan por nosotros. Queremos decir que hemos emprendido un camino de cambio de la matriz energética inédita en la historia del país. Creo que somos uno de los muy pocos países en el mundo que ha podido construir 8 hidroeléctricas al mismo tiempo, que proveen de energía limpia y renovable a nuestro país. Gracias a esto podemos cubrir más del 90% de la demanda de los ecuatorianos. Sin duda este trabajo nos llena de orgullo porque estamos beneficiando a nuestros conciudadanos sin descuidar el medio ambiente, es más, poniendo énfasis en cuidar el medio ambiente. Hemos dejado atrás este pasado de las termoeléctricas, de las barcazas y de los apagones. Recordemos que la energía es fundamental para el desarrollo de los países. Aparte del costo que esto tenía para el país, pagábamos millones de dólares en energía fósil, en combustibles fósiles que se quemaba para generar energía y así todo, siempre estuvimos en déficit. Hoy día estamos ahorrando más de $1.000 millones, básicamente en generación de energías, y hemos dejado de emitir 6.3 millones de toneladas de CO2 a la atmósfera. Tenemos sin duda una de las matrices energéticas más limpias, no solamente de la región, sino del mundo. Sin embargo, todo esto no tendría sentido si no apuntamos a mejorar las condiciones de vida de los ecuatorianos, de los seres humanos que vivimos en este país. Y esto implica el proveer servicios modernos de energía en el sector residencial. También esto creo que es un cambio importante que se ha dado en el país. Hoy 97% de los ecuatorianos contamos con acceso a la electricidad, a la energía. Y existe además tarifas asequibles que permiten que la mayoría de la población tenga o pueda pagar por ese servicio. 2 millones de familias están beneficiadas de esta tarifa de la dignidad, donde pagan 4 centavos por kilovatio hora. También hemos logrado equidad en términos de lo que los ciudadanos pagábamos por acceso a energía. Recordemos que en Bolívar, una provincia centro del país, pagaban 25% más que lo que se pagaba en Quito y Guayaquil, y además era la ciudad que más cortes de energía sufría que ningún otro lugar del país. Creo que o podemos ver cómo hemos avanzado en términos de equidad, dignidad y servicios. Esto nos ha permitido llegar al punto que estamos hoy, donde decimos que hemos cambiado y efectivamente existen las evidencias de ese cambio. Creemos que este foro es muy importante porque nos presenta una oportunidad de analizar otras perspectivas y retos futuros. Los expertos que estarán esta mañana con nosotros, creo que tienen visiones muy amplias sobre este tema que nos ha citado el día de hoy. Es muy oportuno que en esta cita internacional de Hábitat 3 discutamos el camino que hemos recorrido y, por supuesto, entendamos el camino que tenemos que transitar todavía. Por eso, con mucho agrado, escucharemos hoy al doctor Kirk Smith, quien es parte de la Academia de Ciencias de los Estados Unidos, profesor de investigación en salud ambiental en Global Environmental Health en UC Berkeley. Nos hablará sobre barreras de estrategias encaminadas a la especialización de la demanda para alcanzar la racionalidad en el uso de la energía y potenciar el uso de los recursos locales. También estará con nosotros el doctor Michael Enstadt, quien encabeza la sección de agua, energía y movilidad del Departamento para Programas Globales de GIZ. Nos hablará sobre la situación de la oferta y el uso de la energía, considerando los recursos y tecnología de generación y su impacto en la forma de consumo del sector residencial. Y adicionalmente contaremos con la participación de la doctora Vanessa Castambroto, profesora del Instituto Barnard de Planificación del Desarrollo de la University College de London. Nos presentará el tema Alternativas para la especialización y uso eficiente desde la demanda de energía. Agradezco sin duda en nombre del país, en nombre de Ecuador, la presencia de ustedes, sus aportes, que creo que serán acogidos como un insumo más que nos permitan seguir planificando el consumo y el desarrollo energético en el país. Hemos lanzado la Agenda Nacional de Energía 2016-2040 la semana pasada y sin duda estos foros y este diálogo nos ayudará a mejorar esta planificación futura del país. Les auguro éxitos en la jornada y tengan la seguridad que aquí, como en todos los rincones de nuestro país, de donde estamos trabajando desde el gobierno, estamos haciendo historia. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor ministro. La demanda de energía en el sector residencial tiene muchísimos vectores energéticos, es decir, consumimos diferentes tipos de energía en el sector residencial. Y eso representa un gran reto para el aprovisionamiento de este tipo de energía. Ustedes conocen que tenemos energías modernas, amigables con el ambiente, y las energías no modernas, que también son muy contaminantes. Toda esta problemática engloba uno de los ejes fundamentales de la nueva agenda urbana que se está tratando en Hábitat 3. Es por eso que queremos continuar con la presentación de Mike. Vamos a hacer presentaciones de alrededor, máximo 15 minutos cada una. El video de Kirk es de 15 minutos, para ver si podemos alcanzar a tener un momento de preguntas y respuestas al final de las presentaciones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Martin, Honorable Minister, respected delegates, colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you today and to share some of our GIZ experience. To share with you some of our experience and views on the energy sector, especially as it regards the energy efficiency in buildings. And I'd like to thank Lydia for giving me the opportunity. And I have to apologize that I do not speak Spanish. I do my presentation in English. I hope that is okay for you. So we're looking at the issue of energy efficiency in buildings, but I think it's an issue that you have to put into a larger context, and I was very impressed and excited when I heard about your ambitious path towards a more sustainable energy system for Ecuador. Because also the country where I'm coming from, Germany, we have engaged for a couple of years now on a radical transition system towards much higher shares of renewables, towards much more energy efficient systems, also changing our sources of energy, in particular the phasing out of nuclear energy after the Fukushima incident, but also a trend towards the reduction of the burning of fossil fuels, in particular coal, that still has a substantive share in our energy and particular electricity mix. So I represent GIZ. GIZ is a federal agency, a federal enterprise of the German government. And we are working on behalf of the German government in countries worldwide, and particularly developing countries, emerging market countries, supporting reform processes. And energy has always been one of our core sectors. GIZ currently supports governments and authorities in more than 70 countries worldwide in their transformation of their energy systems. With a very broad spectrum of activities, and I'll just give you a very brief sketch of the entire sphere of our work, because I think it's important to, as a context, to then zoom in on energy efficiency in buildings, which is important in the context of the habitat. So there are these four main areas in which we are engaged. One is the improvement of basic energy services. You are all fully aware that nearly 2 billion people worldwide lack access to safe and humane forms of services of energy and electricity, and the improvement of access to energy is one of our core activities. But I'm very also impressed to hear the high achievements that you have here in Ecuador in terms of providing energy access and particular electricity to your citizens. Then the promotion of renewable energy has been one of our core activities for many years. Let's say if you look back 10, 20 years, it was mainly focusing on piloting new forms of electricity production from renewables, in particular solar and wind. These technologies have now come into the mainstream, so we see a clear shift also in our activities to support countries in integrating very large shares of renewables, and in particular intermittent renewables like solar and wind, into electricity systems. I think your country is blessed with the high resources that you have on the hydro side. Many countries don't have that, so the challenge there to introduce larger shares of renewables is much bigger. And then certainly energy efficiency. We often see that as the, let's say, the missed opportunity, something that does not receive the due attention that it should have, and that's also why I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak here today. And we divide in our work, energy efficiency work, in various subsectors, buildings, industry, power plants, transport sector, and I'm going to focus today on buildings, but I think it is important to remember that buildings are, again, part of a more integrated system, and in that sense, when you address the issue of energy efficiency in buildings, we think, we're convinced from our experience, that you have to do that in a systematic manner, and by also addressing questions of where do buildings get their energy from, and that is often the issue of district energy systems, district heating systems, in particular in colder climate zones. So it's important to take a systematic approach and not just look at buildings or the building. We have operations in energy efficiency worldwide. As a matter, I won't go into any details, but it's also important to remember that challenges in cold climate zones and warm climate zones are very different when it comes to improving energy efficiency for the habitat. This is a rough estimation that we feel comfortable with about the shares of energy consumptions by sector from a global perspective. For the building sector, household sector, we consider that about roughly, let's say, a third of the energy we consume worldwide goes to buildings. We feel that there are great opportunities untapped in energy efficiency there. Some of the estimates that form the basis of our work, we think that there's a rough economic saving potential in the building sector of about 40%. That is very significant when you look at the global share of building sector. We think that the main approach from our perspective to address this issue is not so much financing, because a lot of the energy efficiency activities you can undertake to improve the situation are highly economic, because you basically can finance them from the energy savings that you can realize. But that there's really a lack of awareness of training and professional skills to address the issue in the appropriate manner, but also at state level, but also particularly at municipal level, the need to build the relevant institutions that can support higher efficiency in buildings. I'm going to skip for the benefit of time. I just wanted to share with you what we consider to be the sort of mainstream opportunities in renewables and energy efficiency for buildings. And when I say mainstream, I'm saying that because there are today on the market many more technological opportunities, much more advanced opportunities. There's a big discussion worldwide about smart building. We think smart buildings are important, but it's just as important to have smart users of these buildings in order to realize the potentials. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are more advanced technologies on the market, but I think from our perspective, in particular for the countries in which we work, some of them are already an interesting option, but a lot of them probably need another 5-10 more years of maturing before they can really be scaled up in a big way. I wanted to share with you one study when we look beyond, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years, and to better understand what is the challenges and opportunities of the longer-term future. GIZ has recently undertaken a study called the Delphi Energy Future Study, looking at energy systems of the year 2040, trying to understand through a Delphi methodology, that's a kind of qualitative research methodology, to understand from experts worldwide what do they see as being the major trends. And for those of you who have an interest in more sort of long-term perspective, which I'm not going to address here, I would like to invite you to look at our study. If you Google it under Delphi Energy Future, you will find a website that this has all the information. So when it comes to the technologies and solutions that also GIZ sort of tries to promote in its work, I've tried to make a distinction here between renewable energy and energy efficiency interventions, being aware that a lot of these solutions should be more systematic and try to combine both at the same time. I think modern building, the building of the future, is one that is not just efficient or uses one or the other appliance, renewable energy appliance, but that we have smart buildings that integrate both opportunities, renewable energy and energy efficiency, in a most systematic manner. Rooftop solar, certainly. I was yesterday standing on the 10th floor of my hotel overlooking Quito. I saw that there's a lot of roof space here, which probably also provides an opportunity for more installation for rooftop solar, both for water heating and for solar PV, for electricity. Water heating, I understand, is a particular challenge here, given the pricing you explained to me, Martin, yesterday, of gas. That is an alternative fuel to heat water in the new systems. So I think, again, that's a very important indication that it's not just about the technological solutions, but when you want to scale up these solutions, you really have to look at the economics and the incentive schemes that you have in the overall energy sector, and to see how you can best incentivize through government regulations, through other forms of interventions, the take-up of these renewable energy solutions. Rooftop solar, for example, is PV is a very common technology today in Germany, all over the country. You see people on commercial buildings, private houses, having these installations. This was triggered through a very generous incentive scheme that the German government has set up many years ago. It's been has become mainstream on our markets in Germany. Ground heat pumps, I think, it's a great opportunity for those buildings that have a heating requirements, especially when you combine those ground heat pumps with photovoltaic installations to run these pumps. Again, something that is very much mainstream in especially new buildings in my own country. Then certainly the issue of biomass provides great opportunities for many countries of the south, and I also understood from you, Martin, yesterday that this has great potential also for the future of Ecuador, for the energy systems. Solar assisted cooling, I called it here. We're often asked what are the opportunities for cooling of buildings. There are, again, the more advanced systems that work on the principle of absorption, direct use of irradiation for cooling. Again, as I said earlier, there are technologies out there, but we feel that they need a bit more maturity before they can really be scaled up, in particular in often more difficult contexts of developing countries. When I now come to energy efficiency, I think what is first and foremost important to realize and to understand is that retrofitting buildings and putting a bit of an efficient appliance here and there is only the second best answer. The best answer lies in the architectural design of buildings, and it is important to work with the energy experts and the architects to really shift a trend that we see currently worldwide, that we tend to build buildings against the climate rather than with the climate. And we see that, for example, also in Africa, there's massive urbanization trend, massive build-up of the building stock in the country, and a lot of these buildings, or most of the buildings, do not take an optimal planning approach. But if you build today buildings that will have a very, very high energy requirements over the years to come, because they are planned not in a very intelligent manner. So, and that's also what we see as our role as GIZ, to help countries build up that expertise, work with especially architectural schools, to train young architects to build, as I said, buildings with the climate, not against it. Then what's most common intervention for us still is working on building envelopes, insulation, shading, very common practice, also very broad experience that we can bring from our own domestic market in Germany, where the government is implementing very large incentive schemes for retrofitting with insulation. Then appliances, certainly lighting, I think probably it's something that we will not discuss anymore in a couple of years' time, because especially the LED technology is like a revolution in the lighting sector. And I don't know the situations in your country, but I see that in many parts of the world changing very, very radically, and we're seeing much more efficient lighting systems coming up. But again, as I spoke earlier about the user and consumer, we feel that all these technical solutions do not make sense if you do not complement them all the time with awareness raising and training, and sort of incentivizing behavioral change in the way we use our buildings. You see a lot of waste coming from a lack of an understanding of the user of a building, what the energy efficiency opportunities are. That's, I know, can be opening and closing windows, using shades, the way we use the appliances, be it from the fridge to the TV. There's a lot of opportunity in that comes at basically zero cost, but requires a bit of awareness raising. And I think there's a central role for governments, but also certainly for agencies like your institute. I would like to leave it there for the time being, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. Agradecemos la intervención de Mike. Nos ha dejado claro que hay un reto muy grande de traer energías renovables al sector residencial para los diferentes usos, y que esto es una problemática que se vive en todas partes del mundo y que engloba una temática muy importante sobre lo que se está tratando aquí. El siguiente expositor no está aquí. Kirk Smith, como es un investigador que ha tratado muchísimo el tema de India, y a él nos interesaba mucho que él nos comparta sus experiencias, por eso lo pudimos grabar desde Nueva Delhi, y vamos a escuchar el video de Kirk. Esperamos que sea también muy interesante para todos ustedes.
From India, where I'm sending this in this video. I'm going to talk about household energy, an ancient problem, modern solutions. Ancient problem I'm going to speak of is the health impacts, although there are other types of impacts of use of traditional fuels. I've worked on this problem myself for nearly 40 years in studies around the world, primarily in Latin America and Asia. We've conducted many of the first studies of the health effects in the 90s, last decade, from the household air pollution, from the use of these fuels. And in particular, we have many dozens of studies from Latin America and Guatemala, where we also conducted the first randomized trial, starting in 2001. Now, it's the oldest pollution source in human history by definition. We've been using wood as a fuel for nearly 2 million years. In fact, it's the defining moment of changing from pre-human to human, animal to like to human, was the control of fire. No animal uses fire, only humans use fire. Today, the three solid fuels we use are wood, and drop residues, and coal. Now, most of the coal cooking is in China, and they are the fuels that cause health problems I'm talking about. The use is pretty much closely connected to poverty, much of it in sub-Saharan Africa, as you see, some in Latin America, in the Andes, and in Central America, and Haiti. Also, of course, in India and China and parts of Asia. What's been happening? Has it been getting better? Has it been going away? Well, yes, in some places, not in others. In Africa, it's actually rising. Blue is the number of people using solar panels. It's actually increasing every year. In the Americas, it is declining slowly. In Southeast Asia, which is India basically, it's staying the same, not improving. And in China, it's slowly moving down. This is mainly dominated by China. Overall, globally, it's about 3 billion people. It has been 3 billion people for at least 40 years. And of course, since 1950, there were only there were less than 3 billion people. So I think it's fair to say probably more people than any time in human history are using solid fuels. The problems due to it are health, and I'll talk more about that, but there are also other problems. Inefficient use of natural resources, threat to the forest, if people cut down trees for fuel, inefficient use of women's time, and risk to women of gathering fuels, and of course, climate impacts, but I'm only focusing on health. Now, why do we worry? What's going on in wood smoke? It sounds like a natural substance. It is natural, but it doesn't mean it's benign. Here's a list of toxic chemicals, many of the toxic chemicals in wood smoke. There are many others. There are thousands of chemicals in wood smoke. The ones out at the end here are no toxic materials. Some you've heard of: benzene, butadiene, benzopyrene, formaldehyde, dioxin. All of these found in wood smoke. This mixture is quite similar to other forms of burning biomass, including the most well-studied one, which is tobacco. This is similar to tobacco smoke, not the same, but similar. And the health effects are very much similar. The same kinds of health effects we find with tobacco smoke, we also find with high doses of wood smoke. One way of comparing those two is to look at how much is released in the kitchen. A typical biomass cook stove cooking for a family releases about 400 cigarettes an hour of smoke. Now, the woman is not sticking the stove in her mouth. It's not like smoking 400 cigarettes an hour, but like having 400 cigarette smokers over for dinner. It's a lot of smoke. So when I show you the health effects, think of tobacco. Most people accept that tobacco causes major health effects. Well, this is the same kind of health effects. The first person in human history to have her exposure, air pollution exposure measured using this kind of fuel. This is woman in India, nearly 40 years ago, coming on 40 years ago. This is the measuring air pollution levels in her mushroom zone or breathing zone. And you can see that very high levels of pollution, 500 micrograms per cubic meter all day. 10 micrograms is the WHO guideline, very far from healthy levels. Of course, this is just one study, but now we've done hundreds of studies like this, basically verifying these kinds of pollution levels all around the world. What are the health effects? Well, one of the major health effects we think is child pneumonia. It's the chief cause of death in the world. This is a dose-response relationship with extra risk for pneumonia. This is how much people are breathing of the air pollution. This study here is secondhand tobacco smoke study. Here are ambient air pollution studies. Notice these are much lower exposures, but they're still getting health effects. And then the red dots here are from our Guatemala studies showing at higher levels what kind of pollution, what kind of health effects you find. So this is all very consistent evidence, and outdoor air pollution, secondhand tobacco smoke, household air pollution, all mainly combustion particles, a lot of it from biomass in every case. But we have this evidence now not just for child pneumonia, but for stroke in adults, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in adults, like chronic emphysema, ischemic heart disease, the major cause of heart disease, and the major kind of heart disease in the world. There's child pneumonia, and also we have lung cancer. So we have pretty good evidence, both directly from village households, but also bolstered by studies in other places. What do we find? Well, here's household air pollution. It's number 7 globally as a burden disease, as it's called. Here we compare it against LPG, a clean fuel. But remember, this household air pollution is only in 40% of the world population. 60% of us, everybody I'm sure listening in to this talk, and myself, we all use gas or electricity. We're not part of this. So what does this look like in a country that has a lot of use of household, like India? Here is household air pollution is number 3 as a risk factor, and it has pneumonia in young children, cardiovascular disease, stroke heart disease here, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease here. Those are the major 2 components. So it's a major cause of ill health in developing countries. If you like premature deaths, this one is based on lost life years. It's about 900,000 premature deaths a year in India. In combination with outdoor air pollution, which is down here, it is the single largest risk factor. The household plus ambient is the single largest risk factor in India today. We've heard the problem, the extent of the problem, and the reason we're concerned is how it vexed. What has been done in the past to deal with this problem? Well, the main approach has been to basically, I call it, make the available clean. To make the available biomass clean, to burn more clean. I'm not going to go into great detail, but let me summarize that many hundreds of so-called improved biomass stove programs existed around the world, some at least 60 years. Early ones in India in the 1950s, now ones in Latin America starting in the late 1970s, with dozens of others over the years, and some ongoing now in Latin America and Africa and Asia. Here are some of the vast variety of stoves that have been developed. This is the plancha stove we used in Guatemala. This is the fancy Chinese biomass stove that they introduced 150 million of them more. Chimney is buried in the wall here. Here's the most advanced stove today. Generates electricity from the heat of the stove, and it runs the blower, make it cleaner, and also will charge your cell phone. Dozens, actually, if not hundreds of other varieties around the world. Problems. Best of these do save fuel, which is a good thing, and it has social value to save fuel, but none to date are clean enough to achieve significant health benefits, to meet the WHO guidelines for release of pollution indoors. This is unfortunate. They're certainly better than they were in the past, but they aren't health intervention devices yet. More effort is still warranted, but it isn't yet a solution, but might be. So if we look at how the household energy people think about household energy, here is a so-called energy ladder, for example, in India. Here's poverty down here across the horizontal axis, and here's, in this case, the amount of air pollution produced per unit fuel, per meal, let's say. The very poor use agricultural residues and dung for cooking, and a vast number of people who use some form of wood. There's a little use of coal in India, still a little use of kerosene for cooking, not much. A little use of biogas, that's all. And then a large number of people are using LPG. That is basically, if you want to spit your eyes, it's wood, LPG. Yep. Pipe natural gas is starting to come in very rich in urban areas, and electricity a little bit in urban areas. So this is the energy ladder. The approach that has been taken is to try to take, well, basically what we're trying to do is fill in this area here, this empty quarter up in the upper left. That means to get poor people to use clean food, so clean cooking. One way to do it is to go from the bottom, to try to make wood burn more clean. And that's what all these improved stove programs have tried to do. Unfortunately, none of those programs have produced devices that cross the barrier between solid fuels and non-solid fuels. And you can see there's a vast difference between the two, probably a factor of 100 or more in terms of pollution. Maybe eventually they will be able to, and then produce a device that is also attractive and people will use. It's a big challenge. Nobody's ever done it. So this is the approach of making the available clean. Now I want to talk about the paradigm of making the clean available, and that'll be the subject of the next. Okay, so this is the next stage, part 3. I think it's actually going to be 4 parts now, just to make it more logical. The new paradigm is to basically, instead of making the available clean, let's make the clean available. So how do we do that? So paradigm number 2, which is specifically being developed in Latin America, is what you might call stepping out of the box. This is a quote from the president of Ecuador. If you don't need your father's landline for a phone, why do you need your mother's stove? And he and Ecuador are pushing a massive change, taking into account that electrification is essential for communities and many social and economic benefits. And electrification also allows a wide range of highly efficient cooking devices. So Ecuador is electrified, nearly 95%, but it hasn't been using electric cooking using LPG. But every time a switch is flipped instead of a match is struck, it's good for health in a household. Reduce the amount of combustion going on in the household. So what is an induction stove? For those of you who don't know it, it's electric, a completely different technology from traditional electric stoves. It's not like microwaves. It's a high frequency magnetic field that induces heat in the pot alone, so the energy is wasted on heating anything else up. It's more efficient, 90% instead of 60% efficient, turning electricity into usable heat. Faster cooking, depending on what you're cooking. Safer and cooler. Surface is warm but not hot. Doesn't burn or cause fires. Your dress falls on it, doesn't catch on fire. Your child falls on it, doesn't burn. The child long lived, easy to clean. Large economies of scale in manufacturing, like other electronic devices. Here's the magnetic fields down here, and it's inducing the heat right in the pot. Here's one of the many pictures on the web. You can see that this is cooking here. The water is boiling, but this newspaper is not catching on fire because the newspaper is not getting hot, only the pot. So it's not hot enough to cause a fire. You couldn't do this on a biomass stove or a gas stove even, but you can do it on an induction stove. The Ecuador story is switched out nearly 100% from biomass to LPG in the late 1980s, early 90s. Now changing out all stoves to induction. 95% of houses are electrified, soon to have 8 new hydropower plants, so they're calling it green cooking. Primary motivation is to eliminate the $700 million a year in LPG subsidies. Cheaper for both government and households and LPG. So it's the next phase. It's the next phase on the energy ladder, energy development, is to move to electric cooking, induction cooking. Low-income and other deserving households obtaining free stoves. Vast receive stoves at zero or low interest paid on their electric bill. All households with the induction stoves receive the first 80 kilowatt hours a month free. They've taken a loan from the Chinese to buy the induction stoves. They have a local bank this is the Industrial Bank for Latin America, a loan for infrastructure development. LPG equipment is increasing in price due to change in tariffs. 2 or 3 years, LPG subsidies to be removed. Field studies show high social acceptance of induction stoves. Local research and manufacturing development tests local habits. Widespread and sophisticated social marketing. Thank you very much. I'm sorry not to be there to answer questions, but people can send me an email, and the best way to find my website and my email address is my name, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you very much. Ladies,
muy interesante el acercamiento que hace aquí sobre el uso de la energía en el sector residencial, porque el uso de la energía tiene también otros efectos, como es la afectación que puede tener energías modernas y no modernas a la salud. El siguiente punto que vamos a tratar son alternativas también para la especialización y uso eficiente desde la demanda de energía a cargo de Vanessa.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Buenos días, ingeniero Luis Espín, señor Mike Cascan, organizadores y delegados. Es realmente un honor para mí sentarme junto a los impulsores de lo que yo veo es una transformación radical del sistema energético de este país. Estoy realmente bastante impresionada. Y también me impresiona, también agradezco que, señor Espín, que encuentre una relación entre la energía, la ciudad y la equidad, porque creo que eso es fundamental en the new urban agenda. So, to complement the 2 previous presentations, I want to speak of what we don't know, what is the future of energy and cities. My name is Vanessa Castan, and I work in University College London in the Development Planning Unit, and then we are developing 2 pioneering lines of research, which follows 2 specific questions that for me still remain unanswered in relation to the new urban agenda. The first question is, Why does energy matter to people, particularly to city dwellers? What kind of services do they get from energy? The second question is, what kind of interventions can bring about an energy transition in urban areas that actually change the lives of people? And part of the work of Professor Smith relates a lot to that, particularly in terms of health, in terms of cooking stores. There are other questions in cities that have different problems. With regards to the first question about people, our research follows a global project comparing how energy matters in the everyday life in cities all over the world. And the first insight from this project is that the social and material relations around energy in every city are unique. They belong to the city as they depend on the local culture, on the specific history of infrastructure development, and given the political character of energy, on the way energy politics are played at the local level. For example, case studies that I have been comparing have been Hong Kong in China, Bangalore in India, and Maputo in Mozambique. And of the three cases, really, Hong Kong is the only one that has an homogeneous energy landscape based upon traditional models of fossil fuel electrification. In contrast, Mozambique's population would be an example of what we've seen from Professor Smith, relies mostly on charcoal and other biomass fuels. So only 8% of the energy consumed in Mozambique is electricity. So thinking about a total change to electricity is very far away. We have to think of other ways to address energy access problems in this kind of city. In Bangalore in India, the energy landscape is characterized by diversity. All manners of energy sources coexist in the city. And what you have is a landscape of great intermittency with constant blackouts and individual strategies for service provision, diesel generators, but also the development of renewable strategies from solar water heaters to PV panels and so on, which are developed at the private level and often with strong participation of businesses. But in these cases, what we know is that the increased availability of electricity alone doesn't necessarily improve the reliability of the system, doesn't necessarily benefit the urban poor directly if they cannot afford it, if there are other aspects of the energy service, for example, the construction of their houses. And our colleague from GISA was highlighting how important the built environment is to guarantee the energy services are in a particular urban context. So the architectural history and also the cultural practices and the political history of a city equally shape the possibilities for energy access and the possibilities for a low-carbon transition in every city. What we need is context-tailored solutions in which attention is paid to the specific factors that shape the provision and use of energy in every city. So from this perspective, I move to the second question. What are really the possibilities for action in cities in terms of improving efficiency, but also creating a broader energy transition? Looking at the context means also appreciating the value of localized, context-specific, scale-appropriate alternatives, which respond directly to the needs of urban dwellers. Sometimes simply provision of energy and provision of electricity is not sufficient. And within the city, I'm particularly interested about what is the role of planning. Often, systems of urban planning and systems of the delivery of services, they are not necessarily coordinated. They may play the role in a completely uncoordinated manner, even though they are clearly related, both to identify needs, but also to identify interventions in the built environment that can change radically the way we access energy. So when I talk about urban planning, also I'm just not necessarily thinking only about the spatial planning, although spatial planning has a role to play, particularly in cities which are very unequal and where energy services are very different within the city. But also energy planning is a means to build partnerships. And one thing about this energy transition is that it's not a matter for governments alone, it's a matter for business, it's a matter for communities, and it's a matter for people in the normal houses and in their own households. And here, urban planning is a key instrument whereby local needs can be met by bridging different forms of knowledge and bringing down top-down and bottom-up approaches, ultimately making possible strategies for co-designing livable cities. So with this, I will conclude, as I know we are very ahead in the timetable, and I'll leave some space for questions, particularly if you have more questions about the specific examples which I have studied in Hong Kong, Maputo, and Bangalore. Thank you.
Gracias, thank you very much. Para hacer honor al tiempo, vamos a dar paso a una o máximo dos preguntas, dependiendo de cuán largo vayan las mismas. Les recuerdo que tenemos que salir de la sala con tiempo para que la otra sesión también pueda dar inicio. Y queremos dar una continuidad a este tema, así es que si ustedes pueden y tienen más preguntas, hemos abierto un hashtag que se llama energía en el hogar, para que le puedan dar seguimiento y seguir conversando con nosotros. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Mi nombre es Byron Miranda, soy director ejecutivo de Relación. Se han tratado puntos de la generación de energía, pero en ningún momento hemos escuchado que la generación de energía geotermal y la energía nuclear. No sé si este es el panel adecuado para ello, pero sí me gustaría saber si han considerado dentro de sus esquemas de este tipo de generación de energía. Un segundo punto es el cambio a las cocinas de inducción en el país. Es un proceso que está llevando de buena manera y buena acogida. Una sola cosa, el incremento de las planillas de luz se ha dado entre un 25 y 30% en las nuevas cocinas de inducción.
Bueno, la parte del panel es muy difícil reducir en una hora, en menos de una hora, en 50 minutos, lo que es energías y los diferentes tipos de energía. Energías modernas incluyen mareomotriz, sin embargo, mareomotriz es una energía que está en desarrollo y esperamos que pueda cubrir cierta demanda como promete la tecnología. Es difícil sintetizar esta temática en tan poco tiempo y los panelistas tienen sus diferentes especialidades. Y lo que hemos querido es traer a esta temática a hábitat, porque la energía es parte del hábitat y el hábitat necesita energía limpia y la mareomotriz es una energía limpia. Podemos profundizar sobre el tema, tal vez en otro foro. El incremento en las planillas de luz es algo relacionado a los precios y a que obviamente la cocina va a consumir energía. Obviamente consume menos energía que la bombona de gas. El tema de los precios es un poco más sobre los subsidios, pero estamos hablando de que estamos trayendo energía limpia al hogar con sus disminuciones en efectos en la salud. Y hay muchos pros y muchos contras que hay que analizar. Es un tema de que se tiene que debatir el uso de la energía, no solo en las cocinas, sino en las otras aplicaciones que tiene la energía eléctrica, pero sobre todo viendo todas las aristas, ¿no? Las aristas que tiene la problemática, no solo el pago de la luz o los efectos de la salud, sino proveer energía moderna y limpia al entorno construido. No sé si con un poco.
Yo quisiera aclarar quizás un poco más ese punto. Creo que hay que considerar que la energía eléctrica en el país es barata. Y de hecho, lo que ha pasado en el país al subsidiar el gas no es bueno para el país. Es decir, el gas ha tenido, el gas subsidiado se ha usado más porque quienes en realidad pueden pagar por ese hidrocarburo que, digamos, a quienes estaba orientado el subsidio. Entonces, creo que el subsidio que no está focalizado es una mala inversión para la sociedad. De movernos a las cocinas de inducción, movernos a sistemas más eficientes, hemos visto muchos de los side effects que tiene el cocinar con electricidad, con energía limpia, hace que de alguna manera también ese subsidio se focalice, porque lo que estamos viendo es que quienes tengan, por ejemplo, la tarifa de la dignidad no van a ver un incremento sustancial en sus tarifas. Quienes sí podemos pagar algo más por las tarifas, evidentemente vamos a ver un incremento. Personalmente, les digo yo, por convicción personal he usado cocina eléctrica desde que me acuerdo, ¿no? Nunca he usado hidrocarburos, sino cocina eléctrica. Y bueno, es decir, creo que se paga algo más, pero tampoco es algo que no se puede pagar, que es no razonable.
Buenos días. Una pregunta muy corta para el señor ministro. Mi nombre es Luis Grau, estudiante, bueno, hace poco me gradué de Ingeniería Civil y Ambiental. ¿Usted va a buscar más incentivos para que la gente, tanto por los inversores como los dueños de casa, puedan buscar nuevas formas de energía renovable, como la solar o la geotermal, o uso de carros eléctricos híbridos, porque ahora los carros eléctricos, los carros híbridos igualmente pagan impuestos? ¿Ustedes van a buscar estas formas para incentivar a nosotros, las personas, a usar otros tipos de energía renovable? Gracias.
Bueno, sin duda creo que es uno de los planes que tiene el país, ¿no? Y creo que hay que, lo que decía hace un momento, tenemos 8 hidroeléctricas construidas en estos 10 años, lo cual por primera vez le pone al país con superávit energético, y de hecho la iniciativa esta de la sociedad de inducción fue precisamente por eso, ¿no? Porque existe la capacidad de energía para poder mover el país hacia esa, digamos, derroteros. Evidentemente tenemos que seguir trabajando en energías renovables. Hay varios proyectos hidroeléctricos que están, digamos, considerados que son proyectos que tienen estudios, pero también hay proyectos geotermales que están siendo también analizados, porque el país también tiene ese potencial. Y claro, sin duda todo esto nos mueve a pensar en eficiencia en el sector automotriz, en pensar en cómo, digamos, empezamos a usar carros eléctricos y cómo empezamos a cambiar esas cosas también en el país. Quizás nos tome un poco más de tiempo, ¿no? Es decir, es más complicado esto, requiere más infraestructura de soporte para tener carros eléctricos, pero el plan es ese, usar energías renovables, usar el potencial que el país tiene, porque creo que lo decía Mike hace un momento, ¿no? El Ecuador es rico en recursos hídricos y digamos, potencial hídrico, más allá de recursos hídricos, potencial hídrico que nos permite generar energía eléctrica barata y sustentable.
Muchísimas gracias a todos. En honor al tiempo tenemos que entregar la sala. Les agradecemos por haber participado. Muchísimas gracias, Augusto, y nos vemos.